All right, let's make a formal introduction for our listeners. Good afternoon, Gregory. My name is Claudio, and I'm calling you from Washington, D.C., from the Student Fairfax City. We're very humble and grateful that Gregory Spawton accepted our invitation to the show. Well, Gregory, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for having me.
Gregory, let's go back to the beginning in your life. Were you born like in a musical family? How old were you when you perhaps began taking piano lesson or guitar lesson? Back in the day.
So, a completely unmusical background. I literally played recorder at school, sang in the church choir, things like that. I started to get heavily into music when I was sort of 15, 16. I think I saw a couple of bands and I suddenly thought I want to play guitar. So I got a guitar when I was 17. It's the first time I'd ever picked up a guitar. So a very late starter. I took a year out before I went to university and sort of studied hard and learned to play. Formed a band called Equus and we played some shows and things like that. And then I went to uni and I was trying to be an archaeologist and I kind of really didn't do much music. And I came back to it probably in the late 80s, so I took a little break. So I honestly, my background is not really musical at all. It's just something that came from listening and enjoying music rather than from something that's in the sort of family background.
And then, so you were like in bands equivalent of high school. I imagine that you were not just 100% music, but was any family pressure to go to university, forget about music? A musician is a crazy lifestyle. You're not going to make any money. Go to academia, get a job.
Quite the opposite, actually. I was a massive hippie, and so I had very long hair. Yeah. And my mum, bless her, my mum's still alive now, but she just assumed that I would just go and do my own thing and meet a girl and just play guitar. So there was no pressure from her whatsoever. She very much wanted me just to kind of do whatever made me happy, really. She did want me to go to university, but she wasn't, she didn't kick off about anything. My stepdad, I used to practice so many hours a day for a year or so that it did used to wind him up a bit, because of course we were living in a flat at the time and all you could hear was this guitar scales. So it must have been a bit mind-blowing for him. Bless him. But no, there was no pressure at all. It was just, I had a tough childhood for a few years, but by the time I'd taken up guitar, things had settled down, and my mum just said, "Go and do what you wanted to do," and broadly, that's what I did. Bless her.
Yeah, good. What kind of music were you listening at the time when you were 18 to 20 years old? Were you in progressive rock?
Yeah, I was. I started. I in the early 70s, when I became aware of music, my parents would have music in the car, and so I was kind of my mum would listen to Barbara Streisand, my stepdad would listen to Rod Stewart, and I'd hear sort of classic 70s kind of music, Harry Nilsson, things like that. So the radio was good then. I had a good these kind of things were in the background and they sort of seeped into my soul. Glenn Campbell, things like that. And I got into prog rock quite early. I think maybe. Oh no, I know what it was. It was my brother. My brother bought Sending England by the Pound. Well, so my brother's 5 years older than me. He went record shopping at the time in England. The Sex Pistols had started, and his friends were trying to get him to buy the Sex Pistols album, but he sort of didn't. He bought Sending England by the Pound instead. He brought it home. He used to have these very long baths, and he'd leave the bathroom door open, and he'd put his record on, and he'd turn it up really loud when my mum was out. And so the whole house would have this sort of be filled with Sending England by the Pound. And so that was just kind of, this was kind of this noise in the background. And then after a bit of time, I began to really tune into it. And I can actually remember the moment I was at the bottom of the stairs and I heard this little guitar tune, da 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 da, and it stopped me in my tracks. I thought, that's really nice. And I asked my brother about it. And I remember him saying to me, oh, these songs are really long. And that interested me because I wasn't used to the concept of ambitious rock music. It was sort of a backdrop of pop music. I mean, maybe some of the Beatles was complex and ambitious, but, generally pop music was sort of 3 or 4 minutes. So that intrigued me. And I started listening to that album really, really heavily. And then, I started collecting Genesis albums. And you mentioned before we started the interview that you spoke to Armando Gallo, and that was a big thing for me. I bought his book on Genesis. There were not many rock biographies at the time. They're quite popular now, but back then there were not many. So I bought his book. I think it was The Evolution of a Rock Band. Then it was published as I Know What I Like, and I started reading that, and of course it began to mention other progressive rock bands, Van der Graaf Generator being one of my favorites. And of course there wasn't the internet then, so how did, in 1977, 78, 79, how did you find out about rock history? It wasn't easy. You'd pick up stuff on the radio, you'd pick up what people said to you, you'd talk to your friends at school, but you didn't have a kind of this instant connection with the music that you're interested in and the wider world that was out there. So I kind of, that book was really important. I started to listen to other bands like Yes and etc. And I got heavily into prog rock. And then in the early 80s in England and the UK, suddenly we had a second wave of progressive rock bands headed by Marillion, who were the only one that became really successful. But there were other bands like 12th Night and Solstice who I absolutely fell in love with. And we had a rock club here, a famous one called the Marquee in London. And I used to go down on the train. I was only 17 at the time, but again, my mum just used to let me. And so I'd just go on the train and I'd be back home at sort of 4 o'clock in the morning. But I'd go most weeks, to see these bands. And they were a small venue, but it was just hot and sweaty and exciting. It was rock music. It was prog rock. It was great. So that's kind of where I started. That was totally in my mind when I picked up a guitar and I wanted to do, that's what I wanted to do, that sort of thing. And weirdly, many, many years later, that's kind of ended up what I do.
Yeah. You mentioned Selling England by the Band. That was one of probably top 10 albums in the history of music, according to me. I mean, Genesis was way ahead of the time. And you mentioned the Marquee Club. That place it doesn't exist anymore. It was very, very famous. Everybody who is somebody in the music business kind of plays one way or another the Marquee Club, because that was very, very famous. All the big names.
Oh, totally.
Big name. They ended up playing here.
Yeah, it was. And in fact, Genesis went back there and played a show, I think in 1980 or 81, just like a tiny show. And I remember the story is because they had 2 drum kits, of course, and they could hardly fit them on the stage. And I think Phil knocked half of his drum kit off halfway through. So they knew how important it was to them as well. And to the extent that they went back and played there. So it was my upbringing, really. It was some, I just got heavily embroiled in music, and it became, I think as a lot of prog rock fans are, it becomes, again, you said before we started the interview how important music's been to you in your life and still is. And I think that's the thing with prog rock. People that listen to prog rock, they feel it hard. It's a big part of their core identity. It's not just top 40 music in the background. It's really important to their core being, really. It's where they, it's emotional connections with other people. It's a lot of things. So I'm very, it's strange. I mean, I listen to lots of other things, but I'm sort of rooted in prog rock, and I'm not ashamed to admit it or anything else. I love it. It's a great genre. It's where rock music, tries to be something, something more. And at its very best, it's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. When I was living in South America, right, in the 80s, before I came to the United States to study, I was I will go to used record store, buy vinyl, and that was, of course, before the internet, no cell phone, nothing. And I will buy records of, I don't know, Genesis or Led Zeppelin or Pink Floyd. And I said, man, I want to listen to this band. It sounds so great. Of course, at the time, the bands were not going to Latin America. We're kind of stopping in Brazil. Now everybody go there, and because it's money to be made. During the winter here in Europe and in the United States, and summer there, so many bands. So I was going crazy that I was buying all the record. Who are these people, man? They sound so good, So, and it was I got lucky along the way, I suppose. You formed the band in 1990. Big Betrayal. What was the motivation? I mean, eventually you start playing with your friends and said, well, let's just try to put something together.
Yeah, I had a day job at the time, and I just left university, and I bumped into this guy at work on the very first day in the office, and he played guitar, and he said, "Oh, what do you play?" And I said, "Well, I also play guitar, and what sort of music do you like?" And that was this completely random thing that a guy that became a really close friend to me and became a big part of Big Train happened to be a huge prog rock fan. So we both had a completely shared sort of musical DNA, really. He was working with a friend of his called Ian Cooper, a childhood friend of his, and they were doing, they had a band called Arkshine, and they were doing just the two of them, just taping stuff in their rooms, did a couple of gigs and stuff, a bit more like Ultravox, that kind of synthy thing. And then Andy was kind of two-timing in with me, so he was doing me some evenings and Ian other evenings. And we had a 12-string guitar, and we were doing these big sort of rambling Anthony Phillips kind of things, these 10-minute guitar pieces that we put together. And eventually, I kept saying to Andy, look, Ian plays keyboards, why don't we just, make a band? Let's just get together. So eventually, after about a year, he introduced me to Ian, who I still know very well. And we formed Big Train, the three of us. And the name, it's a terrible name for a band, but then so a lot of names are terrible for bands, aren't they? It was the only one that we could we sort of mutually agreed on. We threw lots of names in the hat. We got a drummer, and we started gigging locally, and I was effectively what happened is nobody else could be bothered to write, so I ended up doing most of the writing, so it became kind of a vehicle for my songs, but the other guys were really important. Whilst I was delivering, I guess, the chord sequence and the melodies, they were, arranging it and putting their heart and soul into it. So we did what all little bands do. You play local gigs, you write music, you try and get, put a couple of demo tapes together, that sort of thing. Same old pattern that everybody else has. And eventually we got a little session on a local radio show, and that radio station paid for bands to go into a professional studio to record one song, and that was a big moment because the guy running that studio was Rob Aubrey, who I still work with now, and we did a little song for this radio thing, met Rob Aubrey, and it became clear that Rob was able to perhaps help us to record an album at a 24-track studio, 2-inch tape, full pro sort of thing. So we went in there and recorded with some money I borrowed from my parents. We recorded an album called Goodbye to the Age of Steam. That was our first experience in a proper studio.
And then, so you end up recording an album. Were you able to sell that album and start playing in bigger clubs, or I suppose bigger coffee shop, or no, not really?
Not really. We felt a bit let down by we'd signed to a very small label called GEP, and they were it was the label for IQ, a prog rock band called IQ, who were around in the early 80s, still around now. Yeah. And on sort of signing to them, there was a sort of suggestion that we'd get to support IQ, which would be our foothold into bigger audiences, but that never really happened. We got one show supporting them at the Astoria in London, which is quite a big venue, so that we had 25 minutes on stage in 1996. So that was our one big one bigger show moment. And then I think we had a festival in the Netherlands, so we drove all the way out to that, called Prog Farm, in maybe 97 or something. But it was all getting a bit, I'd got kids. Ian had left by then. People were having kids and life was getting in the way, so it was all getting a bit fractious and a little bit too much work, really. So, you kind of, like almost everybody, you just kind of have to make a decision whether or not you just quit or you just sort of keep it as a hobby. And I did the latter, really. Mainly because I didn't have other hobbies, I suppose. So I just carried on writing songs and working more or less with Andy at that stage. And we'd lost, our GP lost interest in us, and, it was all a bit not great. So we did, again, we were watching what other people were doing, and other people were able to release their own albums on their own labels. Like Marillion started doing that, and other bands started doing that. So we thought, we'll do that then, shall we? But the one thing that we did that we got right at that time was, rather than keep going into expensive studios, we bought some recording software called Pro Tools. We bought some expensive microphones, and we started doing as much recording as we could in our home studios, because that meant that our recording costs were, next to nil once you paid for that capital outlay. So we put together three albums like that. Difference Machine, Gathering Speed before that one, and an album called Bard as well. So we had a sort of run of 3 albums that we did with a new singer, Sean Filkins, and that we did ourselves. And we found, rather strangely, that we began to pick up an audience. We went from selling, famously, Bard sold 300 copies, and still we carried on. And then the next album, Gathering Speed, started to sell a few thousand, and then Difference Machine a few thousand more. And then by the time we got to the Underful Yard in 2009, suddenly, with a new singer, David, it suddenly, we started to shift tens of thousands of albums. And we were like, wow, this is actually becoming, like a not just a hobby band anymore. It's becoming something that's more professional. And it was a strange, it was just one of those things. We just hung on in there. We got better at what we did. I got much better at writing over the years, and David was a very, very good singer. So he was able to lift our material and really show off what we could do. And also, two other important characters came into my life. One was Nick DiVirgilio, who we started using as a session player in 2007 on the Difference Machine. And I immediately, once you're sat in the studio working with this guy, you think, my God, this guy's an incredible drummer, like an extraordinary player. And that the whole band just lifts everything up several levels. And also I began working with a chap called Dave Desmond, who's a brass arranger, and he arranged brass for us on the Underful Yard album. So there was a kind of coming together of people that just began to push the band to a much, much higher level than I could ever have dreamed of, really.
Yeah, well, that's great. You mentioned the album from 2007, the Difference Machine. That's a masterpiece, man. With, of course, Nick DiVirgilio, and then Dave, and then Pete from Marillion. There are 2 albums, actually. If I take a lot of the history of big train. I don't have everything, but I have several albums for you, and then the Different Machine, and also the album called the Underfall 2 years later.
Yeah.
A big difference, in my opinion, between the first, like you mentioned before, right? The 94 Goodbye to the Edge of the Steam, the 97 English Boy Wonder, Bar and Weather, but in 2007, the Different Machine was, in my opinion, my humble opinion, without being a musician, it was another level altogether. It was like a different band. I mean, this guy like graduated, from they're in the big leagues or so, so to speak, right? So
I think it was, I think it is I still think it's a good album. It's quite a, we got into a band briefly called the Mars Volta, and we were influenced by them. So it's a little bit spacey at times and a little bit looser, I think. It's got a good vibe to it, that album. We worked really hard on making that. And the nice thing is the Wonderful Yard, which is completely different musically, is also strong, so we ended up with a couple of albums there that were really, in my opinion, nicely recorded, nicely made, and spoke of sort of two different sort of sides of the band, but both of them did well for us. They were Different Machine sold a lot. Wonderful Yard sold a hell of a lot more, and I think if I look at it from the perspective of now, I think it's because of David's voice that the band began to reach a wider audience. So Sean Filkins, who was a really good singer, he had sort of more of a rock voice, but David had a sort of a soul voice, and I think at that time he brought a lot of soul and emotion into the music. And we're rehearsing a couple of songs. We're going to play a couple of songs from the Wonderful Yard in our tour in a few weeks' time, and it's nice going back and listening to them again and playing them again, because there's a lot of emotional content there, which I think, and that's the thing for me with music. I think with especially progressive rock, because it's sometimes quite complicated music, I think you mustn't forget the emotional heart of things. It's getting those things together that is where it really, really starts to make people, want to listen to you. And David's voice was a big part in the band, going further on and deciding to go and start playing live again. It was at that stage we were just a studio thing, really.
How did you end up meeting Dave? Because I think he was that close to getting the gig with Genesis at the time, with Peter, with Phil Collins, that ended up leaving, right? So he was that close, and they ended up picking up Calling All the Station, I think was the album.
Yeah, totally. And I didn't know anything about the story of Genesis's, who they were. I mean, I obviously knew they'd found Ray Wilson, but I didn't really know who else had been in the running. And when David basically came and sang a song or two songs for a chap called Martin Orford, who was the IQ keyboard player, and he was doing some solo recordings. And Rob, our engineer, rang me on the day that he did the session with David, and he just said, "This guy's just come in. He's just amazing. This is the guy that you need." And I wasn't looking for another singer at the time. I was perfectly happy with Sean, so I was a little bit wary about it. But Rob sent me some rough mixes of the songs. I thought, yeah, he's got a really good voice, this guy. So I mean, David lived a long way away from me, so I ended up giving him a call, and we spent several weeks getting to know each other just on the phone. It was a phone. We didn't have we didn't have video things in those days. Right. So yeah, we just talked, and he, I, of course, being a big Genesis fan, I asked him about the audition process, and he was. In fact, what happened was they selected two singers. They selected David and Ray, and David got contracted. He was on holiday, and they flew a contract out to wherever he was, Tenerife or whatever. So he was signed as the singer for Genesis, and then the management got cold feet about there being two guys, and said, you need to make a choice here. So they went with Ray, and Ray understandably got more of a background success story because he'd had a hit single with, I think, Stiltskin. And David hadn't, he'd not, he'd always been under the radar. He'd done one solo album, but hadn't got much of a track record in professional music. So that was it. Yeah. I mean, David used to tell me these fabulous stories of his time with Genesis. He went and sang with them a couple of times at the studio. Of course, Nick DiVigilio was, he recorded drums on the same album, the Calling Us Nations album. So they were sharing notes. Lots of stories I can't tell. Sadly, I can't in public. But, some really interesting sort of background stuff and some shared background musical DNA there. And it did sting, if I'm honest, it did sting David. If you imagine at the time, it was a new beginning for Genesis. David had, struggled in his sort of solo career. Suddenly it looked like he was about to become, the singer for one of the most iconic progressive rock bands on the planet and play big shows and all those things. And then it was just taken away from him. It was there and then it was gone. So he quit music. It was a massive blow to him. And he quit music. He went off and had some kids and things like that. And it was only that he decided at some stage. I think that's the thing. If you're a musician, it's hard to resist the call. You're always going to be called back. And at some stage, he just thought, I can't not be a musician, singer, songwriter. That's what I've got to do. Which is why he called Martin Orford and said, "Can I sing a couple of songs for you?" And that's how he circuitously ended up in Big Big Train.
And then you guys, thank you very much. And you end up at the time, you guys were more like in a studio band. And then what was, I suppose, any pressure from the record label? Well, you're going to studio, we're selling record, but hey, we want to make more money. You need to go on the road. So, put your stuff together and then let's start touring, right? Was it difficult?
Well, we were doing everything ourselves. It was a complete, homespun, home run operation. In fact, it became a nightmare as we started selling more and more albums. We did a couple of albums called English Electric. The whole house here would just be full of CDs. It was just, before streaming had really kicked in. So it was becoming difficult to manage. I still had a day job. My wife was helping me out massively. She still had a day job. So it was a huge operation for us. And I actually began to get to a stage where I was dreading doing albums because of the amount of admin. I'm not very good with admin, and it was something that all musicians are rubbish at admin, but it's something that I really struggle with, as my wife would tell you. So we just sort of battled through that. But at some stage, we started making a forum on Facebook and stuff like that, and you began to have much more direct contact with the fans. And I began to realize that there was an expectation that you're a band, you need to be performing. Yeah. And I have to be honest, I'm a bit of a nervy performer. I'm not particularly, I've never been wanting to be on stage in front of people. I'm more of a songwriter. But I could see in 2013, actually, we need to do this. We need to get back on stage. David was very reluctant. He was at the time, his partner at the time was not supportive and did not want her husband or partner to be, wasting time in going back to music, I suppose. So it was hard to persuade him, but in the end he committed, and we booked a couple of shows at a venue in London called King's Place. And that was we had a year to prepare for it. We booked the shows, again, totally self-promoted. I didn't know what tour management was or anything like that. And, me and my wife, Kathy, did the vast majority of all the organization. It's a massive amount of work. And, I started to just think, Christ, I'm going to be back on stage soon. And in the intervening years, I'd gone from being the guitar player to the bass player. And so I spent a few months learning my parts and all that sort of stuff, and found myself on stage, at this small but sold out venue in London. And that was the start of another chain of events that, led to the band selling more albums and doing more shows and all of those things. It was amazing. Honestly, that first night we walked out, because I think there was a sort of disbelief that we would do it, and we did it with a brass band and everything. It was a full lineup, and it was just 400 people there. But that was, of course, the hardcore fan base that were there the first weekend, and it was just like this wall of noise, and it was amazing. Honestly, I still look back at it and it makes the hairs rise on the back of my neck. And of course, you then think, "Wow, I really like this. We must start playing some more shows." And so we have over the years, albeit we never played that many. This autumn we're doing 17 dates, I think, so that's the longest tour we've done so far, and I think our future will be doing a lot more gigging, hopefully, but we'll see.
Yep, that's great. In around 93 to, I think, 98, if I remember correctly, you were signed to Giant Electric P at the time, and I suppose, right, that they were doing, I suppose they were doing more of the admin stuff, booking venues, distributing the record, or you still were going to the post office every week to.
It was a license. It was a licensing deal, really. So, effectively, we would pay for the music to be recorded, and then we'd provide the album with them, and they would have it pressed up and sell it. But it was a very typical licensing deal. So if you think of those days, maybe an album would sell for about £10, 10 British pounds, maybe $15 sort of thing. The label we'd get £1, 10% of the price for that. So you have to sell a lot of units to make it financially viable, and we didn't, and it wasn't really viable for them, and it wasn't viable for us. So they lost interest in us, and we, as I said earlier, we went off and did it ourselves, and it was the best thing for us, because I learned personally a hell of a lot about the music business doing it ourselves, and probably also realized the limitations of doing it ourselves. How impossible it is really to, at a certain level, to try to do both things. But it was just, I think it's important. Up until about 3 years ago, we were self-managing, so we did everything, we managed the band ourselves as well. So I got a good route I've got roots into many aspects of the business, which helped me, make informed decisions with our management now. So it's I wouldn't do any of that differently. It's just was ridiculously hard work for a while.
And I've been told by the fellow musician that you reach to a point where we are getting bigger. We have a bigger audience base. We want to play in different other venues. We trust, or we don't trust the record label. They're not doing that much for us. And they're taking, 90% of the profit. And you say, well, we should do it ourselves. And then the band kind of become 10% music and 90% managerial stuff, which for some people, they don't want to touch it, right? Like you say before, we are musicians, somebody need to book the venue. I don't want to call anybody, I want to record stuff. I want to play with my guitar, my bass, and, and how you balance that stuff. I mean, if you spend too much money in music, in management, you don't record the music, right? But then again, if you let a tour manager or a manager do everything for you, then you have less control. You may need to agree stuff that you don't want to, right? So,
you put your finger on it perfectly. I mean, you've got that, that contrast between the self-managing artist and, the artist signed to a label. Now, we have been talking over the years to a number of labels in recent years. I can't announce anything at the moment, but it may be that we are going to do something different very soon. That's because we've reached a point, I think, where, it just, the trade-off is such that being with a proper record label, is just too much the right thing to do than trying to run things yourself, or with, even with management. So that's kind of where we are now. And there'll be news on that soon, and that will be a very big difference for the band, because it's like being back in the 70s when you had a label that is responsible for you, but you are responsible too, so suddenly we won't have control over when we release albums or how many albums we release, or that becomes something that is decided by other people. But there is a point reached, I think, and we've reached that point where you can only go so far doing things, for yourself, and you need the industry behind you to really get to that level where where you can get heard by as many people as possible. And that's it for me, and that's it for all of us in the band. It's purely about our music being heard by as many people as it could possibly reach. And so that's why we're looking at a different way forward right now.
Got it. Perfect. At the time, you end up releasing 3 great albums: English Electric Part 1, Part 2, and then Folklore. It's masterpieces, to me. And feel free to elaborate on that, how the English and then the second part came together. And
yeah, I'm very proud of those albums. They, David, it's the same with Alberto and new singer. I brought David in as a singer, and I didn't realize he was a really good songwriter as well. And the same thing's happened with Alberto. I brought him in as a singer, but he's a really gifted songwriter. So I've been in that respect. I've been very lucky with the people that I've worked with, because I think if it's just my songs, I think it's one person's take on music and one person's view on the world, and I think there's strength in diversity in that respect. So yeah, English Electric was a real high point for me, where David was writing some great material, I was writing some strong material, and we carried that through to Folklore as well. We got a sound that was right for us. We had this Dave Desmond brass band on board. We started to use string quartets. It was like it was like being in the Beatles. You suddenly had a bit of money to play with, so you could start to think, oh, I want a string quartet on this, let's bring in the brass on this one, and we can afford to record them. They were really good times, and we were able to put together a few albums, a good run of albums, I think, which took us, it reputationally took us further forward. And then of course we were also playing some good live shows by then as well. So I think generally things were on the up, and yeah, good times.
And then by the time you end up receiving several awards by the Progressive magazine, the Stone and Steel, Blu-ray, and then a Breakthrough Award at the Progressive Music Award as well. So, it's I suppose for a musician and for any profession, it's great to, hey, I worked so hard 20 years, and now I've been recognized. Yeah, we know we're selling records, and we go to we book a gig and people attend it, but big name magazine or institution telling you, hey, you guys are doing great.
Yeah, I mean, that feedback's brilliant, and those Progressive Music Awards were really important. There's a magazine here called Prog Magazine, which has been it's been published since 2009, so it's been an ongoing concern for a long time, and it's really, it's done wonders in terms of helping the identity of prog rock stay in the sort of public eye. And for a few years they were doing these Progressive Music Awards, and they were brilliant because small bands like us would be there, but also Genesis would be there, or Van der Graaf would be there, right. Camel, all the big names were there, and suddenly you were in this room together with these people, and it was a real it showed how together the scene was, and how everybody recognized that prog rock is a particular identity, where people have these sort of shared musical values, I suppose. And I remember I was quite shy when I started going to those, and David, who was far less shy, I'd be going like, "Oh, there's Peter Hamill over there, one of my heroes," and so David would shove me towards him to say hi and all those things. But that was it. You'd go to the loo and find yourself standing next to Steve Rothery or something. It was really great nights. It's a shame they're not doing them anymore. But it's just, as I say, it's quite humbling when you realize that, even the biggest stars in prog rock are just as excited for you almost as you are. We've had Tony Banks has come to our shows, Anthony Phillips has come to our shows. It's lovely that there's that support from the old guard who can see that they've heavily influenced us. And we're almost carrying the torch for the music that they wrote back in the 70s, I suppose. Great times.
Yeah, good for you. And then, have you ever, by that you look back at, your one of the first albums you listened was Clare Lindley by the band, the Genesis, and eventually to the year you were doing, there was customary for you guys to do rehearsal at the Real World Studios. Yeah. Peter Gabriel. So for a kid that you listened to Clare Lindley by the one, you were 17, 18 years old, and eventually, man, we are doing rehearsal with one of the big name in the music history, so it's...
Yeah, I mean, Real World is an amazing place. There are not many residential studios left in the UK, probably not in the world, actually. So it is literally exactly as Peter Gabriel set it up to do. You go away as a bunch of musicians and you live on site. Yeah. You get out of bed in the morning, you have breakfast, and then you're just straight into the studio. These two amazing studios they've got there. It became a home from home for us for quite some time. Peter was elusive. We met him actually the last time we worked there before David died. We met him. We became aware that he was on site, and bless him, he came to. He just came into the canteen one day with his dog and said hi, and I'm going to speak to Peter Gabriel. So I ran. David was David. I think actually we were doing David's solo album at the time. So I ran and got David, and we just sat and chatted for a few minutes. It was a genuinely lovely moment, and he is a absolutely beautiful human being. And he, after David died, he took his time to sort of personally email us and message us and shared some kind words. He's been an extraordinary influence, and again, it's truly a privilege to meet these people and realize what lovely human beings they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked before that, before we started recording, that the two of us were on the same. I went to the Verona gig, and then I went to Milan as well. So we're talking about Peter Gabriel's tour, and the Verona gig is so beautiful, man. I mean, of course, but the venue itself and
I'm a huge history nut. So when he announced the tour, I was like, oh my God, he's playing a Roman amphitheater in Verona. Yeah, I'd visited the amphitheater before just as a tourist to see the Roman ruins, but it was an irresistible thing. So we managed to get tickets. By chance, Big Train were recording the following week in Trieste, which is so probably a couple 100 miles from there, but close enough. So I actually I was supposed to arrive in Trieste on the Saturday, so I had to confess to our manager that I had actually bought a Peter Gabriel ticket on the Saturday night, and sorry, I'm going to be a little bit late. But they're really cool about it. And what an evening. And I think we all frightened it was going to rain for the whole gig, but it just sort of stopped almost 5 minutes after the gig started. It was an amazing show. And what a night that was.
Absolutely. You were at the time, I think we are talking about 2019, 2020, you guys getting bigger, and you thought, man, we need to do like a global scale touring. We know what we're doing. We're playing bigger venues. We need to kind of take our music out of the UK and more countries in Europe, and then go to the United States, and then the pandemic hit, and everything were shut down. How difficult it was for you guys?
It was a complete disaster. We were planning. We got to the stage of planning a US tour, and we'd paid for visas. So we'd spent £10,000 on visas, and suddenly they were gone. We couldn't tour at all. So we lost two sets of tours, lost a vast amount of money, and it was just a complete nightmare. And alongside everything else, I think because I think the pandemic made people in the band start to think about their future. And the future, as we saw at the time, was that we were going to be spending a lot more time on a tour bus, doing some more hard touring. And I think people began to decide that wasn't for them. So Dave Gregory, our guitar player at the time, left. He was a little bit older than us, and he just said, it's just not for me. Danny left as well, and Rachel. So we ended up with, half the band leaving. It was just down to the four of us, me, Rikard, NDV, and David. And we had a Zoom call, the four of us, and it was like the Four Musketeers. We decided we'd carry on, recruit, some more musicians, and try and get the band back on the road. But the pandemic just kept coming round. It just seemed to, whenever it seemed to go away, then it would come back, and it all sort of blurs into one now, really. But it was a couple of years of hell, to be honest. And so I think we took some time out. We like most musicians, we thought, we better record an album then, and we recorded a couple of albums. And I don't think we probably weren't. I think we recorded 2 albums, but maybe there was one good album that we could have recorded, but we recorded 2. And I think because we were just trying to basically make the most of the time that we had. So it wasn't. There's not the best set of releases that we made. And then amongst all of that, suddenly, David had an accident, and suddenly, my kind of musical life just fell apart overnight. Just a completely shocking. He was okay. We're in our 50s, but he was in the prime of his musical life, really. He'd been working on solo music, but he was coming back to Big Train full time, and suddenly that was gone. So yeah, we had just a couple of, dreadful years, really. Just really, really, ending with the worst news that you could ever imagine in terms of a band.
Yeah, I suppose that psychologically affected you a lot. I imagine, on one hand, well, we cannot tour. Never mind that millions of people are dying all over the world. That may be the end of the world. Half my band is leaving. Yeah. They passing away. For sure you thought, man, maybe should quit this music business and do something else for a living.
I was really on the,
on the verge.
I didn't feel, I didn't think, I just didn't think it was possible to carry on, really. Now there was a thing that, because David and I were really close, so we would talk for hours, and he said to me many times over the years, if something happened to me, you must carry the band on. It would be, a way of carrying my music on, he would say. So I would, I'd sort of, I'd be non-committal about it. But his partner, Sarah, reminded me of that after he died, and said, look, you should, if you can, try to carry the band on. And so we left it a few weeks to see how we felt. And then we had a meeting with our manager, Nick, and NDV and Rikard. And it was, from my point of view, I decided by then that I would try to carry on if the others wanted to, and that was it for me. If either Rikard or NDV had said not for me, then that would have been the end of the band. So that was my position, and so we had this call, and I was just sort of basically sat in this chair, sort of trying to gauge how they felt about things. But the thing with the band is, I mean, David put his heart and soul into it, and so did we. You know, we all over the years have put our heart and soul into the music, and so we said, no, let's see if we can find a new singer. Let's see if we can rebuild. And so we left that call empowered to seek a new singer. And to try to carry on. And I have to be honest with you. In the last year or so, there have been times when I have regretted that decision. It's been very tough. It's not been emotionally easy for anybody. There've been times when it's been brilliant. There've been times when it's been really hard to think it was the right thing to do. And it's only probably in the last few months that I've felt settled with it, and that I think it is the right thing to do in all respects, and that we can carry the band forward in a way that's that respects the legacy of David and all of those things.
Absolutely. I'm talking about the legacy. My understanding is you're going to be attending the John Wetton tribute and ceremony next, I think, in a couple of weeks. Big name there with Phil Manzanera and Annie Haslam and Steve Hackett. I got lucky along the way that I interview all of these guys, and Roger Dean. I'm going to be interviewing him, and might be a beautiful event being there, I suppose. With all the big
it's going to be it's going to be amazing. It's a very small venue, so it'll be really I think it's a streamed thing mostly, but of course there's a lot of guests there on the night. So I'm lucky to be there. I'm very excited by it. I mean, I know I'm also aware of a couple of unannounced guests as well. Some surprises I think will be happening. So it should be quite interesting if it all comes off. Yeah, it should be great.
But I think it's going to be like a 4-hour event. I think it's going to be live stream, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, hats off to whoever's doing the sound and all that lot, because I think that's going to be quite a tough gig. But it's a professionally run operation, so I'm sure it'll be great. I mean, it's all great musicians that are going to be there. So I'm looking forward to it.
I got it. And all right, let's talk about your tour. Will take place in August and September. My understanding is you're going to be in the Netherlands, Germany, Sweden, Norway, and a couple of days in Italy, and then you will end up in London in the Cardigan Hall. 2 nights actually. You must be excited. You've been probably rehearsing, and all of you getting together, and
we're very excited. I mean, we recruited a guy called Alberto Bravin as our singer. He was a singer for Italian prog legends PFM. I saw him at a gig in I think in 2015 in London, and he was there was a couple of guys from the original PFM lineup, and then there were some newer guys who were playing with them, and he was sort of stood near the back of the stage playing keyboards and singing, and I was absolutely blown away by his voice. I was sort of, wow, who is this guy? I'd not come across him before. So I just made a mental note of him, and I looked up his name and found out who he was. So when we came to look for potential replacements for David, he was the first name on my list, and there were a lot of other names, and we auditioned quite a few people, but he was the guy that came through. We played a few shows last year with him. He's a lovely human being, and we had a great time. But I think that was only 3 shows, so this is 17 shows. It's a much longer tour. It's a lot of time on a tour bus. I'm no spring chicken, so there's some elements of it that I'm not massively looking forward to. And honestly, it's people think. I'm sure they're aware, but when you look at a band on stage, you're not sat in the audience. I mean, I'm not. When I'm looking at bands on stage, thinking that guy has spent 500 hours learning the set list that you're that they're trying to play for you. And that's exactly how it is for us all. We're just in our own home studios, just slaving away, learning bass parts for me and, vocal, violin, drums, etc., etc., etc. And then we'll arrive in rehearsals in, I think, about 3 weeks' time, and hopefully everyone will know what they're doing. And then we'll fire the band up, and I think we've got about a week of rehearsals. We've got a big long set list. It's about 2.5 hours, and we're going to try and vary the set list so that we know 2 shows are the same effectively. I've always wanted to do that and not been in a position to do it before, so we're quite excited about that. And yeah, we're playing. It's a nice variety of shows. There's some small clubs in Germany and things where people will be standing up. And there's a couple of bigger venues like the London and Birmingham Town Hall venues are quite big. So it's going to be great. I actually can't wait. As I said earlier, I'm not really a performer, but I've got used to it, and I'm really looking forward to it now. And it's nice to be with the band and to connect with the fans. It's great.
Right. How you, from a managerial point of view, how do you manage the finances? Because, as you know, right, fewer people are buying music, buying on our CDs. CDs in many ways are going on. It's not my case because I buy a lot of music, but how the break-even points need to be X number of dollars, X number of T-shirt that you need to sell, and I don't know, meet and greet and sign picture, and you end up doing a lot of other things that are not music related to break even.
Every tour we've ever done is lost money, and this one will be the same. And the problem is, the longer the tour, the more money you lose because you're out on the road more for longer periods of time. I mean, Big Big Train is it's a crazy idea for a band because there's 11 of us in the live band. So immediately all your costs go up. There's two tour buses. There's a lot of people to feed, a lot of people to pay, a lot of people to accommodate, all of those things. So at the moment, there's very little prospect of Big Big Train touring and making money on it. So we've relied on record sales, but those are declining as well because people are now streaming, and streaming income is quite low. So the economics are proving more and more difficult for us. We launched something called the Passengers Club a couple of years ago. Our webmaster had this idea, a chap called Steve Cadman, about providing some additional content for people, and that's helped us. That's brought in a lot of additional money, but that's got its own demands. You have to provide that content for people to want to be members, and of course that means that you're not always doing the day job, which is writing and making music. So it's a really tough situation. We're playing Cruise to the Edge next year, and again, the financial offer on that is really good, but by the time we get everybody out there and rehearsed and paid for and everything, all that money's gone. It's just it's not a very easy thing for us to negotiate. So one of the things that we're looking at for future years is probably going out in different configurations. So I think there'll be times when we go out as an 8-piece, maybe 7 of us with one brass player, and there'll be times when we go out as an 11-piece, with the full bands, and there'll be times maybe when we just go out as a 7-piece rock band and no brass. I think we have to be clever and be prepared to be flexible and do what is right for us to keep us going and to not lose money so that we just can't continue existing. There's ways, there's different ways that we'll play live in the future, I'm sure. But that's how it is these days. We're not, unless you're Taylor Swift or in the prog world, maybe Roger Waters or Genesis, even Peter Gabriel. We talked earlier. I mean, he cancelled a show in the UK, and there was, it was reasons were given for the cancellation, but I suspect it was because ticket sales were probably, not as they expected, because, these big shows are big money. People are being expected to pay my daughter was after Taylor Swift tickets, and I think they're £200 or £300, something like that. It's a lot of money to go out for an evening. And that's great if you're Taylor. Nothing against Taylor Swift. I think she's very talented. But I think the problem is those big artists are, selling out big stadiums, taking a lot of money. The promoters are as well. But I think it kind of sucks. It just kind of sucks the money into a funnel where, everything's up this end and the rest of it's down here, and the rest of us are sort of struggling to make ends meet. Now, there's nothing. I'm not one of those musicians that moans about streaming or rails against the world as it is, because the world is as it is, and I can't do anything to change that. So we, rather than moan about it, we just have to be clever and be as clever as we can to keep the band on the rails and to keep things moving forward. So that's it, really. We just, every day we're trying to think of new things to make sure we can keep making music.
Absolutely. Other bands like I don't know, Marillion do like a 3 days, like a long weekend strategy where tour that many people, traveling, hotel is very expensive. What about we try Friday, Saturday, Sunday, London one year, then I don't know, Brussels the next one, Paris, and that way the people will go there. People that want to see you only have to get I suppose a train to go to Paris, London, or whatever have to do it.
Yeah, that's exactly one of the things that we're thinking of. We're not going to do it in the next couple of years, but I think probably maybe from 2026 we'll try and do a couple of big train weekends where, I mean, the Marillion model's great, and I suspect as they get older that probably that'll be where they end up rather than touring a lot. They'll probably focus on those, I suspect. I don't know, that's up to them, but certainly that needs to be part of what we offer to people, because I think one of the lovely things about progressive rock is the sense of community. People love hanging together. Generally, I don't know many prog rock fans that aren't just kind of nice people. Most of the fans I meet are just lovely people, and there's something about that sense of community and giving people an opportunity to hang together and to maybe see, one of the things maybe we'll do is like Friday we'd play the whole of the Underful Yard, and Saturday we'd do some rare, it's the Marillion model really. So we've been thinking about that, and I'm sure that's something that we'll be looking to do at some stage in the next few years, alongside touring though, not.
Yeah. The latest albums, Ingenious Devices, which is another masterpiece. Feel free to elaborate on that. I know it consists of a new version of the East Coast Racer and Brooklyn and Voyager. Feel free to elaborate how that came together, and what was the motivation of putting that together?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to get obsessed about certain things, and I wrote a song called East Coast Racer, and it was really about how mankind was able to harness machinery to do amazing things. And in that story, it was a train, a fast steam train. So I wrote a couple of other songs on a similar theme, one about a racing driver called John Cobb, who broke the land speed record and the water speed record, and another about the Voyager spaceship, which launched when I was 12 at the age of 77. The two of them did. And it's still going. It's outside the solar system now, but they're still going. Extraordinary stories. So they're very deliberately over a few albums. These three songs were on a theme, and then I wrote another one called Atlantic Cable, which is on a similar theme. So, and for many years, one of our plans was to bring the trilogy, the first three songs together in a sort of a separate release. And so we've been planning that for a long time, and we'd got a lot of the recording done before David died. And one of the things that was important to me about it was when we did East Coast Racer and Brooklyn's in the first place, we couldn't afford anything other than a string quartet. When we came to do Voyager, we could afford a full string section at Abbey Road. So I wanted to kind of equalize the songs and have them all featuring that big string section. So we'd gone back to Abbey Road and we'd recorded strings for East Coast Racer and for Brooklyn's. And also I wrote a little piece of music, my first kind of classical piece of music, if you like, just a minute and a half, just to kind of provide a bit of musical connection between them. So I'm really proud of it, and I think if I was to at this point in time, if anybody was to say to me, if say my musical career ended today, and somebody said, "What was your music about?" I would say Ingenious Devices is what my music is about, because that's been kind of the things that I've been obsessed with. Now, we've also recorded a new album that's being mixed at the moment, and that is, I'm so, I mean, I know every musician says they're really excited by their next, though, but I really am. We went out to Trieste, as I mentioned, and we recorded it all in the room together, so it's got a much more of a studio vibe to it. It's got old-fashioned 70s kind of way of doing things. And it's we know that this is kind of, because it's a new lineup, we know it's not make or break, but it's really important that it's not just the next album. It's got to be a really strong album. So we've really been careful about making sure the right songs chosen for it. So that's coming out. We're going to play a couple of songs from that album on the tour as well. So we'll be debuting some new material alongside doing some songs we've never played before and some songs we haven't played for a long time. So as I say, it's a lot of music to learn and there'll be lots of bum notes, I'm sure. But it's about being in the moment. It's not a classical music recital, it's rock music, and it's about delivering those spine-tingling moments for me. That's what it's all about.
How difficult it is to put the set together, because you have done so many albums, very different, with so many people, and of course, if I go to Spotify, which I did last night, the best, the three top songs that, with in terms of streaming number, are the second Brightest Star, the first Rebater, and then Folklore. And then on the other hand, right, you mentioned before that, well, we will have like a set list of around 30, and then, I don't know, to make a number up, and then in Italy we play, well, we have a standard 20 that we always play in an hour, but for the Italy we'll play these three, that but for the London gig we're going to play, we'll take 3 and we put another 3, and for the new people, right, they need to learn 35 songs. It's a lot of work.
I mean, and because it's prog rock and the songs are long, it's actually it's 15 songs plus in London. On the last night we're doing another different thing as well. But so I would think the typical show would probably be about 10 songs, because they're quite long, and we've got a support act as well. So it'll be the variation amongst those 15 songs that we try to do. And I think, so for example, we're playing the festival in Italy. I think that needs to be, I think we'll be playing to an audience that mostly won't know who we are. So therefore, I think it needs to have a certain, the set list needs to be probably our big hitters. For fans in England who've seen us a lot before, I think probably we'll go more for the deep cuts, stuff that they've never heard or we haven't played live for a long time. So that's the kind of judgment we're going to make. But we are not going to make those decisions until the day of each gig. We'll know what we play on the first show, and then after that we'll decide on the day what that show is going to be at the next gig. I think the only exception to that will be, for most shows we've decided probably the first 2 or 3 songs will probably be the same, because I think as a musician, you go on the stage, you're a little bit, the lights are different on this venue, and the crowd's different. They're only 2 inches away from us, or whatever. It's, you can get discombobulated when you're on the stage. So it's useful to have 2 or 3 songs that you kind of know that you're going to be playing before you start going off at a tangent. So it's a lot of music to learn. It's been, it is just learning. It's just playing, on your own basically until a week before the first show, when we get together, and then it's all doing it together. What's amazing is you get in the room and the band fires up, and it always makes me, it makes me laugh the first, because it just sounds like Big Train, and that's a stupid thing to say, but what else would it sound like? But the band kicks off and it's just like, yay, this is us, this is us. we're in a room together and we're making music, and we're going to be together for a good month or so. So we'll be tired and grumpy and all those things that happen on tour. But I'm just really looking forward to it. It's going to be great.
A guy like you at that level, that you have played with the best of the best, you still get nervous?
I do. Yeah.
Until you get the rhythm going and the public and the lights and all right, we are big strain now,
Yeah, as I say, I'm not a natural performer, so in recent years I've just been right. Your job is just to play as many notes right as you can do, and that's it. I'm not the other guys. You've got people like NGV and Rikard and Alberto and Clare, and Oskar who can convey their performance to the audience much better than I can. So there's a bit of pressure off me, really. It's me just trying to do the best I can. I mean, I've got a set of Moog Taurus bass pedals down there, and if I hit the wrong bass pedal, it's the plaster will come off the walls. It needs you need to play that with care. So the role I fulfill is important, and it's important that I get things right. But I'm going to, because it's a longer run of shows this time, I'm hoping that after a few gigs, I'm just going to relax a bit more and just get into a more of a kind of, this is just everyday life. And I mean, something like NDV, for example, has just played thousands of shows. So therefore he gets on stage, and I don't know if he's nervous when he goes on stage. I have no idea. Actually, I've never asked him that. I guess there's some adrenaline flowing, but he just enjoys it so much that if there's any nerves, they're just like slight performance nerves rather than anything else. And I hope during this tour to get to that stage finally after a long time. I don't know. You and I can have a chat afterwards, and I'll let you know if that happens or if I'm still a bag of nerves at the end of it. We'll find out.
Yeah. I only have two more questions. Looking back at your life, is things you would have done differently, or I don't know, an easy question, people that you wish you had played and for many reasons you admire as a kid and it didn't work out, or any?
Yeah, I mean, there are regrets. I wouldn't pretend that I've always got everything right. I wouldn't pretend that I've always handled relationships well within the band or whatever. I've done my best. Maybe at times I've been very single-minded at times, and maybe maybe that's rubbed people up the wrong way. I don't know. So I mean, you could go away and talk to a few people who probably probably don't have much time for me. You'll go and talk to others that can understand what makes me tick and all of those things. So if I could go back and do things differently, I'm sure I'd do some things differently. But there's a lot happened to me in recent years, and I just realized that you get to where you are and you cannot go back and change things. All you can do is keep moving forward and keep trying to make the most of every day. There's some I've had, my stepdad died recently, and he was a dear old soul who supported me, almost all of his life. And so that was a big blow. And with David as well, I've been, there's been some really tough times recently. And so the view I have is just make the most of every day and do the best you can. And I know it's a cliche, but be the best person you can, really. Have I always been like that? No, I haven't always been like that.
And be happy to be alive. How many people during the pandemic, here in the United States, over a million people, and all over the world, millions. And at the time during the COVID, and I looked myself in the mirror and I said, well, I was telling my wife, we may not be alive and so on and so forth, or die or whatever, but you need to start, like this say here in the United States, smell the roses, right? And you start thinking about the important stuff. In my case, I have a lot of music. I see a lot of gigs. I have working companies. I'm a computer scientist. That maybe I didn't like some people, maybe they didn't like me or whatever, but you look back in your life, say, man, that may be the end of the world. And I'm happy to be alive, happy to walk down the street and walk for a walk. People were afraid to go outside because they will catch COVID and die, or spend the wrong one in the planet. You look at the important things in life,
Yeah, that's it. And the important things in life are your family, the people you love, the environment. Yeah. I try and go for a walk down by the river here as often as I can. And, as you get older, you end up chatting to people and giving them the time of day. I think that's important. I think, loneliness is a plague in modern life. I think we tend to be in our bubbles. So, I try and be a bit more outgoing and add something to the world if I can.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, totally. It is about enjoying, every day and trying to extract the most from every day. And sometimes that's just sitting back and reading a book. It doesn't have to be always doing something. Sometimes it's spending time with your mum, chatting with your wife, having a glass of wine or whatever. It's simple things, but I totally agree. Hopefully as we get older, we get slightly wiser, and and I try and talk to my kids and say, this is my experience, and I think do what you will, but try and do the best you can, really.
Again, and the last question, feel free to elaborate, mention your website where people can buy your music, can buy your, ticket to the shows and upcoming things that are for you.
Yeah, thank you. Our website's bigbetrain.com, I think.
And I will put the link there as well. So.
Yeah, thank you. So there's links to all tickets on there. And in terms of buying our music, we have two stores. We have the Bandwagon USA, so that's for American fans. Bandwagon have our physical stock. In the UK and Europe, we have Burning Shared, so those are our official stores. But we're on Amazon and all the usual kind of things. And also, if downloads your thing, we do sort of high-res downloads on Bandcamp. So there's various ways of buying our music. And as I say, all the shows we're playing at the moment, and hopefully we'll be announcing some US ones in the next few weeks. All the ticket links are on that website.
All right. Well, very nice talking to you, Greg.
Yeah, really good. Good to meet you.
See you soon, meeting you. I love your music. I've been following your career for many, many years. So hopefully we can get together, get a cup of coffee or a beer or pizza or whatever.
Fantastic. It's very
nice talking to you, man. Good luck to you. Good luck.
See you. Thank you. Bye-bye.